Jæja, velkomin á Málstofu Rannsóknarstofnunar. Þetta síðasta málstofan fyrir sumarfrí. Og í dag fáum við hana Sandru Granquist til þess að halda erindum seli. Hún sem sagt sérfræðingur hjá Rannsóknarstofnun, þar áður Veiðimálastofnun og deildarstjóri selarannsóknar Selasetturs Íslands. Sandra með doktorsgráðu í vistfræði og dýraatferlisfræði frá Háskólanum í Stokkhólmi og með meistaragráðu í dýraatferlisfræði frá Háskóla Íslands. Sandra stýrir vöktun á landsel og útsel við Ísland og framkvæmir reglulega flugtalningar og stofnmöt fyrir seli ásamt að halda utan vöktun á kópaframleiðslu og ráðgjöf stjórnun á selastofna. Sandra stýrir einnig öðrum rannsóknaverkefnum, meðal annars áhrif manna og selastofna vegna fiskveiða og ferðamennsku og þá rannsakar hún einnig atferli, útbreiðslu og fæðunám sela. Erindið verður á ensku. So we're switching to English from now. The talk will be in English. Sandra, the floor is yours.
Takk fyrir, thank you. Let's see. Yeah, so the aim for this presentation was to give an overview of kind of where the seal research is at the moment. And of course, I'm probably not going to be able to go into depth with everything, but I'll leave some time in the end so we can discuss if there's something that you're more interested in than other things. So in Iceland, we have 2 pinniped species that breed in Iceland, and we focus our research around those species, harbor seals and gray seals. And then, of course, we have several species that sometimes visit Iceland, hooded seal, bearded seal, ring seal, a harp seal, and then, of course, the walrus. So I would like to start with showing this slide, because I think it describes pretty well where we should focus our research for the Icelandic situation when it comes to seal management. First of all, we have population ecology on top of the triangle, and it's our obligation to monitor fluctuations in seal populations, to perform regular population estimates, and to look into other population ecological factors like, for example, pup production, how many pups are born, and also to do other things like look into population genetics and so on. In Iceland, we also have lots of anthropogenic interactions with the seal population. So I put the fishing industry as part of that. And the fishing industry, by that I mean both when we harvest commercial species in the sea, but also, for example, salmon angling. And the fishing industry affects the seal populations in several ways. For example, we have bycatch, which is currently considered to be the highest mortality risk for seals. Seals get entangled in fishing gear and drown. And then we also have, for the longest time, we had seal hunting to reduce an assumed effect that seals can have on the fishing industry. For example, we have the ringworm, which is a parasite of which seals are the host, and that parasite would end up in the flesh of the fish and thereby reduce the value of the fish, mainly codfish. And then, of course, I also put the arrow in both directions because seal populations could also potentially affect the fishing industry. For example, we have depredation, which is when seals would eat fish from the nets. So that can, of course, reduce the harvest that can be used by the fishermen. And, of course, seals are also, both harbor seals and gray seals are generalist predators, so they would eat species that are easy to prey on, and sometimes that commercial species. But to be able to say that seals actually affect the fishing industry, we need to research this, and that's something that hasn't been done very much in Iceland. And then we have something that's rather new, which is tourism. And as everyone knows, tourism has boomed in Iceland over the last decade, we also know that the main reason for coming to Iceland as a tourist is nature-based tourism. So people want to come and they want to look at our nature, they're among wildlife. And we know that wildlife tourism can affect the wildlife. So that's also something we need to. So to facilitate evidence-based management and be able to take informed decisions when it comes to seal management, I want to focus my research around this triangle, so I call it like a triangle relationship. So if you start with the population ecology then, one of our biggest projects is to monitor and make estimates for harbor seal and gray seal population size. So if we start with the gray seals, we count them regularly. We've done that since 1982. And the gray seals are counted during the popping period, which is in October. So what we do is that we fly over in small airplanes. We fly over important popping sites 3 to 4 times and count the pups that we can see. And then we estimate how many pups are born in total in each area. And based on the total population, total pup production, we then estimate how many seals there are in the population. This is the situation for gray seals. You can see the highest population was found in 1990, and then the newest estimate from 2017 was 6,300 animals. And as you can see, there's a little bit of a decline, and based on that decline, the gray seals are considered to be vulnerable on the Icelandic National Red List for threatened populations. Then it's the harbor seal population. This is a typical picture of what it would look like when I fly over the area. This is a rather big hollout site. And harbor seal population estimate is also conducted from air. We've done that regularly since 1980. I haven't done it since 1980 though, although I'm old. But and we count harbor seals during the molting period. So that's in the end of the summer. So that's not the same time as when we count the gray seal. That's in October, and this is in July, August. And for the harbor seal, we count all the seals we can see, not only the pups. So we would fly around the whole country and look for seals everywhere. And then we also know for harbor seals that there's always a proportion that we can't see that would be submerged. So we have to have a correction factor to correct the total number that we observe to obtain the total population. And so we apply a correction factor to the total number of counted animals. This is the situation for harbor seals. The newest estimate is since 2020, and that's 10,300 animals. And as you can see, the first estimate in 1980 was 33,000, so it's been a severe decrease. Most of the decrease occurred the first decade, and then the decrease continued, but at a slower rate. And due to this decrease, the population ends up as endangered on the National Red List for threatened populations. And then what we do is that we look at the changes that has occurred over 3 generations. So that's pretty much 45 years. So that's 3 generations. So therefore, the population is considered endangered. So in 2019, there was a seal hunting ban that was enacted. Before that, there were pretty much no legislation for seal hunting in Iceland. And one of the reasons for this is, of course, the sensitive conservation status that we were able to show from our estimates. And so in general, seal hunting is banned, but it's possible to apply for permits to hunt, like in traditional hunt, where you would utilize the animals. So you can apply for a permit for that. And this is just the regulation, or legislation, if you're interested in, not regulate, if you're interested, you can find that online. So, I'm not a geneticist, but it's very important for us to know if we are looking at, when we are managing populations, it's important to know if we're looking at one population, or if, for example, the harbor seal population is only part of a population that, for example, also can be found in Greenland or something, and also if we are only looking at one population or if there are several subpopulations and so on. So to look into this, because before we published this paper, we knew very little about harbor seal genetics. So since I'm not a geneticist, I work together with colleagues mainly in Denmark, and we collected samples from all of our neighbor countries. And we could, the results we published in this paper showed that the harbor seal population is genetically different from other populations. And at the moment, we're actually looking into a similar study, but for gray seals. And so, as I mentioned before, when it comes to harbor seals, we we can only count part of the population. We know that there's always a proportional population that we can't see that could, for example, that is submerged under the water, right? So it's important for us to know what factors affect when seals haul out on land or when they spend time on land. So therefore, we need to study this. We need to know what factors affect when seals are on land. Also, we need to know, for example, when we should carry out the count. We want to do that when we have the highest proportion of seals on land. So the timing of the census. And when we know the factors that, like the probability of seals hauling out, we can create a correction factor. So a few years ago, me and my colleague Erlingur Hauksson, we published a paper where we could show that there are two peaks in haul-out of seals. So they are more likely to haul out during the popping period, that's the first peak, and then during the molting period, which is when they change their fur. We also got more information on when these periods occur, and that helps us to know when to start the population estimates, for example. We could also show evidence for factors that affect when seals haul out, and that is temperature. Seals like to be more on land when the temperature is high. Wind speed, there's a negative correlation. So seals like to haul out when it's not windy. And also tide height, so it's more likely that they haul out close to low tide. So to count seals from land and air is expensive and was time-consuming to do it from land. So to be able to continue this haul-out behavior project, we tested actually wildlife trail cameras. This is a very simple equipment, actually, and very cheap, even. But it works very well. We put it out on 7 different locations, and we can then monitor numbers and some behavior as well from the cameras. We have 2 papers that we're preparing at the moment, and then I also have a master student who's working on results or on photos from those. And we have those on several areas in Vastnes and also in Hekstanes and in the Westfjords. So if we go back to this nice triangle and look into the fishing industry and the interactions between seals and fishing industry. So when it comes to the fishing industry, like I said, we speak both about salmon angling and we speak about harvesting fish in the sea. And this picture actually describes the scenario quite well. This is the seal center in the background, where we have lots of tourists that comes and want to look at seals. And in the just a few meters away from the seal center, we have the harbor, where we have lots of fishing going on. Among others, we have lumpsucker fishery. This is not other boat, but I thought the picture is nice. It's kind of describing the scenario that we have in a very tiny area. And then we also get, so like I said, bycatch is the biggest mortality risk at the moment, but it's not always that the seals drown in the net. We can also, very often, we get reports of seals that have, that we're able to get loose from the net, but they still have a piece of the net around the neck. And often when seals get bycaught, they are young, and then they grow, and then the net would start to tear into the skin, and that's of course very painful for the seal. So if we start with salmon angling, this is a typical area for a seal haul-out site. Seals like somehow to haul out in areas like this, and most of the big haul-out sites are on sandbanks like this. Often those sandbanks leads into river mouths for important salmon angling rivers, which is the case here. This is on Vastnes or Seirestaðs and Bjargós. And so, because there's lots of valuable salmon in the rivers and lots of seals, seals have been hunted because people think that seals would eat all the fish. And it's true that they sometimes do eat salmon because there's anecdotal descriptions that people have seen seals eating red fish. But it's never been researched before. And before the hunting ban came, over 80% of the seal hunt in Iceland occurred in areas like this by angling associations or landowners. So this is, of course, something that's very important to actually have some research about. So, of course, we wanted to study this. So what we did was that we used different methodologies. We collected feces sample. It's a really smelly job, but someone had to do it. So we collected feces for 3 summers 2009 to 2011. And we did hard part analysis, which is when we look at otoliths. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's a bone, or like an ear bone or a bone structure in the head of the fish, and those are species specific. So by looking at them, we could see what species the seals had been eating. We also used metabolic coding pre-DNA analysis. So basically, we take DNA samples from the feces, and based on that, we can see DNA from the fish species that the seals have been eating. We also used stable isotopes, took hair from seals and muscle, and then muscle samples from fish. But those results are still being analyzed. So these are the results from both the molecular analysis, pre-DNA analysis that I told you about, and then morphological analysis is the hard part analysis. I call it different names, I'm sorry about that. But as you can see, the most important prey for both of those analyses was flatfishes, or sand eels, flatfishes, gadoids, capelin, and herring. However, there's no evidence for any salmonids. So we did the hard part analysis first, and we were afraid that it could be that they were still eating salmonids, but that the otoliths had degraded, because as you can see here, this is like, 38% of the samples included unidentified items that could be degraded otoliths. So that's why we also did the molecular analysis, but there's still, obviously, the seals are not eating a lot of salmonids. We also collected records from anglers. We were asking them to collect, to tell us, we have angling association of 5 different rivers. We asked them to tell us if they found any wounded salmon. And I had meetings with all this angling associations, and everyone told me that it could be up to 30% of the fish that had wounds. So of course we wanted to ask about this. It turned out that it was 0.05% of the fish that actually had any wounds, and of those, of course, not all of the wounds would depend on seals. So it seems like, although it could be that seals are eating occasionally salmon, char or trout, it's clear that just killing any seal in the river mouths would not have an effect on the human or the possibility of harvesting salmon. Of course, it can be that some individual seals would specialize on eating salmon, and that's known from other areas, but it wouldn't make sense to just shoot any of the seals with the purpose of increasing the number of salmon that we can catch. So this is, of course, important also, since I said that most of the hunting before the hunting ban was due to this. So it's important results. Despite the hunting ban, which is one thing, it's still clear that that's not the main reason for, or main mortality risk for seals, because that's the bycatch. And there's another specialist, Guðjón at MFRI, who works with this, but I just want to show you, to give you an example of the situation. So most of the bycatch occurs in lumpsucker fishing gear, and this is an annual average over a 5-year period, which shows that 1,390 harbor seals per year get caught in lumpsucker fishery, which is, of course, a really high number. And for gray seals, it's 990 animals. And considering the population size, this is really high numbers. Just as an example how the ministry has tried to mitigate this a little bit, was that they made experiments by closing areas where bycatch had been evident. And there's no result for this yet. One way of studying, starting to study how bycatch can be reduced, is to know where the seals go. Because we know very little about, both for harbor seals and gray seals, where they are, except for the time when we do the census. Then, of course, we know where they are. We don't know where they are the rest of the year. So what we did was we tagged 5 gray seal pups in this pilot study that we published as a research note, and just to show where they go. And this is something that we want to continue doing, and then trying to link that to co-use of areas with, for example, the lumpsucker fishery. But as you can see, two of the pups went all the way to the other side of the island, so they use a rather broad or rather big area. This is just to show you, so gray seal pups are born white, as many of you know, and then they molt before they start to go into the sea. So before the tagging could happen, we had to wait until they had molted, and this is one that is starting to molt. And then this is a tagged seal. I don't know how well you can see it, but it has a tag, and we glue it with epoxy glue until the back of the neck, and then when they molt, the tag falls off. So if we go into the triangle again, the last part of this is the tourism. And we have actually been studying effects of tourism on, or interactions between tourism and seals since 2008. We've looked at many different aspects of this. But I guess I will have to come back to tell you more about results, because I don't have very much time today. This graph is a little bit old. I should have updated it, but then COVID happened, so this still represents, I think, the increase that we've had in tourism in Iceland. It's quadrupled in just a few years. And this is also something that I want to tell you, that when I'm flying over Iceland to count seals, there are people everywhere. Even like in Hornstrandi, there are people everywhere. And this is completely different compared to 15 years ago when I started doing these area surveys. So it's clear that when you do that, it's so clear that how this can actually affect the population, because we have to remember that although seals are marine mammals, they are depending on also being able to spend time on land. They give birth to their pups on land, they molt on land, and they come on land to rest. So it's important for them, and these are very important biological periods that they have to happen on land. So that's why you have to remember that we also have to think about how they behave on land. And we know that, like I mentioned before, that there are several types of anthropogenic disturbance and effects that that disturbance can have on wildlife. The first thing is physiological effects. We know that if animals are disturbed a lot, stress hormones go up, like cortisol, for example. The heart rate can go up. And we know, just if you think about ourselves, we know that there are many things that can happen if we are stressed. For example, it affects fecundity. So therefore, that's important to think about. And then we also have behavioral effects. So for example, when it comes to seals, they tend to spend time in behavior that are increasing energy expenditure, that are expensive in terms of energy. They become more vigilant, which is when they are alert, looking around, and they flush into the water if they are disturbed. That's just one of the things. The other thing is that animals are forced to spend less time in behavior that is important to them, such as, for example, like I said, resting, but also nursing. And when it comes to pups, it's very important that they reach sufficient weaning weights, because if they don't do that over the period, then it could be that they're not going to survive the first winter. So then if you think about it that way, it's easy to see how that can actually affect the population. And then, of course, we have changes in distribution. And when it comes to seal watching, for example, it's important also for landowners, if you want to build up a seal watching site, it's important to know that the seals are not going to move away. Because if you spend money and effort to build up a seal watching site, you need to know that the seals will be there, right? In terms of seal and ecology, if they are disturbed a lot in an optimal area, they might move to another area that's less optimal with less disturbance. So that's also something that can affect them. This is just to show you an example. This picture is from Hindisvík in Vestnes, northwestern Iceland. And I don't know if you can see, but these are tourists. Seals here, and I think there are also seals here. This is to show you, I think that, so this area has been closed in 2008, but before this, I think there were about 100 people every day. And you can imagine if this happens again and again and again, they are trying to do their thing, nurse their young and so on, that this can affect them. So we published this paper, rather important paper, a few years ago. And it's important because it's actually the first time that effects due to land-based tourism on harbor seals were studied. So this paper has been an important foundation for further studies. And we could show that, this is a vigilant seal. This is how they look like when they're vigilant. So we could show that vigilance increased when there were lots of people in the area. We could also show that the seals would actually, during times when we have lots of tourists in the area, the seals would choose to come up on land further away from the area. We could also show, I could also actually link tourist behavior to seal behavior. So I could show that when tourists are behaving in a calm way, the disturbance is less. And this is important because it means that if we can manipulate tourist behavior, then we can reduce disturbance. So based on this and other results from this paper, we created code of conducts or like behavior recommendations for how to watch seals to reduce disturbance, both for operators but also for tourists. And those code of conducts are actually, you can see in many different areas such as Vatnsnes, Hegstanes, but also in Ytri-Tunga and Kvitanes in the West Fjords and also Jökulsárlón. So they are used. And we are continuing this. We're trying to make a little bit of a long-term longitudinal study. We're looking at doing similar things at 8 different sites at Vatnsnes and Hegstanes in northwestern Iceland, and then Kvitanes and Rauðisandur in the West Fjords. We are, by doing that, we're able to compare different types of colonies, how the seals are affected depending on the group size, depending on topography, how close people can get to them, and different things. So we will be able to have like a broader knowledge of this. And we do direct observations, and we also use trail cameras, the one that I showed you before. And I have another master student who is looking into this, looking into effects of tourism on seals using trail cameras. We're also looking at tourist behavior. And we're also working a lot with social scientists and doing tourist questionnaires to ask what they think about seal management and so on. And this can be combined. And actually, I know that I don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to say that when it comes to management of wildlife or any species, pretty much, it's very typical that most of us, I think, here are biologists, and we would like to work with other biologists. Social scientists would want to work with other social scientists, but we don't work together because our methodology don't match, and biologists don't think that social science is science, and so on. So this is something that I think that I have been successful in doing because I've tried to combine this, and I've tried to work more interdisciplinary. And we actually have a really good potential for that at the Seal Center because we have, I have a biology department, but we also have a social science department, so we can work together with them. And we've done that, and we have, for example, we published this, just a few examples of paper that we've published. We both looked into theoretical models on how to manage wildlife, and we have how to work with locals, for example, and how to use the results that we have from biology to be able to use them into a model like that. We've also done empirical studies. We've looked at how we can communicate biology knowledge to society and to landowners and other stakeholders, and also what type of management actions would be feasible and so on. We had lots of other studies, so I just wanted to really quickly mention those. We've been looking into environmental toxins in seals and compared to other areas. And we are working on analysis at the moment. We published one paper where we can show that PFAS levels are low in seals in Iceland compared to other areas. We've also done some work on acoustics. We've published a paper on how seals communicate under the water. And at the moment, I have a master student who is looking into communications in the Hålat sites, so how they communicate on land through their sounds. And we also, like I mentioned before, work a lot with the Icelandic Seal Center. So we have a great interest in communicating science to society, because that's another thing. I think scientists work too much only together with other scientists, but the reason we're doing that is, of course, to actually communicate that to the rest of the world. I mean, that's why we are hired, kind of, in a sense. So we've done, for example, citizen science or community science projects where people are taking part, regular people are taking part in our research. And for example, we have something that's called the Great Seal Count, or Seltalninga Mikla, that has been very successful, where volunteers would come and take part in our research for one day. And we also recently got funding for a project called Youth for Arctic Nature, which is that we try to engage youth into science, and by that making them taking part in our monitoring schemes and stuff like that, we make them aware of climate change. That's the ultimate goal. It's just a picture to show you how it can look like when we are preparing for the Great Seal Count. And then just a picture of my students and colleagues. Yeah, thanks.
Takk Sandra. Við höfum tíma fyrir spurningar. Jó.
Hi, I'm Carl Gunnarsson, working here at the Institute. But the bycatch of seal in the lumpsucker fisheries, have you analyzed the age structure of the cats, and how does this enormous bycatch affect the stock size of the seal? Is there now you said that the seals are increasing. Is the number of seals in the bycatch decreasing then, or what? How is the relation there?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's decreasing, but we know that most of the seals that get bycaught are because the lumpsucker fisheries happen in the spring, so it's usually seals that are 1 year old that were born last year that would get bycaught. And the reason for that, I don't know, but it could be that they're more curious or something like that. Another theory is that older seals have learned how to not get bycaught, because actually, not from Iceland but from abroad, there are studies that show that because I mentioned depredation before, when seals are eating from the nets, and that actually that study showed that most of the depredation is due to adult males, and they don't get caught, but they eat most from the nets. So.
Oh, Run.
Hi, Run from the MFRI 2. So, first of all, good job on communicating science. You've done a really fantastic job, and the number of papers you publish is exceptional, so well done on that. But I'm really curious about if the seals can kind of acclimate or get used to tourists, because I was once in California and I noticed they had like these tourism ramps and people are looking and the seals don't seem to be disturbed a lot, but they make sure the tourists don't come close. Do you think that with growing tourism here, now the seals are maybe not used to this, but do you think the populations could get used to tourism in certain areas?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for a nice word. And yeah, really good question.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah, the same question.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, good questions then, both of you. Because this is something that's actually rather important. In other areas with other type of wildlife, for example, in Australia, this is something that has happened, for example, when it comes to the dingo. And also in other areas, when like you say, when with marine mammals, this can happen. And the thing is that that's also... that's not what we want to achieve, because that's what many people think, that they're going to get used to it, and then that's okay. Because the thing is that, first of all, wild animals are wild animals, and it's important that they don't get too close, because they can actually become dangerous. And there are, like I mentioned with the dingo, for example, there was recently a kid that was killed, and that's of course a dingo. But I mean. So we try to refrain from habituation, which that is called, and yeah, there are many different reasons for that, but that's one of them. That's something that we're not really looking into.
Yeah, I'm Einar from Hávro. Thanks for your talk. You showed the 2 time series of the population estimates, where the first value in both time series is the highest, and then you more or less have a continuous decline. And I guess that also is then the reason why the stock status is such as described, endangered or whatever. I'm wondering whether the initial, well, there are 2 questions here. I mean, is it likely that the first measurement was an anomaly, is a high value? They're actually the overall, on average, they're actually lower than what was in the beginning of time series. And then secondly, is there any reason to believe that this decline is because of fishing, or bycatch in fisheries, or in a sense because we know that fisheries has occurred for a long time before the beginning of the time series that you have? Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right about the harbor seal. That was the highest count, the first count, and then, but for the gray seals, it's actually not really right because the highest count was in 1990. Let me go back. Many slides. Yeah, here you go. So the highest count was actually not the first one. And actually for harbor seals, there's actually some evidence that the population was even twice the number 5 years earlier. So it was some estimate that was done where not the whole area was counted, but it was important areas were counted, and then it was extrapolated to represent the whole population, and then that gave an estimate of 66,000. So I don't think so, but on the other hand, we know that this first period, this 10-year period, that 1980 to 1990, there was a bounty system for harbor seals and gray seals. And the reason for that was hringormanefnd. So people were paid to hunt seals. And that almost, so with the aim of reducing the population, because at the time we believed that the proportion of seals would affect the proportion of ringworm in the animals, in the fish. And then I don't know if I remember the last. Was there another question?
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, Birgir?
Hi, I'm Birgir at MFRI. Thank you for a very nice talk. Regarding the bycatch in the lumpfish fisheries, it's quite high. So I want to ask you, how do you get this estimate? If it is from the logbooks, because then I would suspect they don't register all bycatch,
No.
or maybe you are using observations. Yeah. But then also I want to ask you if you have any suggestions for how they can avoid bycatch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a good comment. Yeah, you're right. We use for the estimate. It's not me that make the estimate, but I know a little bit about it, and we use numbers from the inspectors, and then we up-calculate that to represent the whole fleet, and that is much higher than what a fisherman would report. You're right about that. So, but this represents the numbers that we get from the inspectors. And then, second of all, sorry, I forgot the question again.
How can you? Do you have a suggestion on how they can reduce their bycatch?
Yeah. So, what was tried a couple of years ago, like I mentioned, was that there was some closures of area where the seals were bycaught. I think that could be a solution, although it's hard because there's always a matter of who. I mean, fishermen want to fish in their areas where the fish are, and the problem is that these are the areas where the seals get bycaught because they use the same areas. That's at least according to the data we have. So that's of course problematic, because if we want to have lumpsucker fisheries, then we can't close the areas where the lumpsucker are to be found. So that's of course problematic. But there are also quite a lot of research on this in other areas, not necessarily for lumpsucker fishery, but for other species, where you can try to think about ways to develop the fishing gear so that they're seal safe. And that's something I've studied a lot in Sweden, in my country. So, I mean, maybe that's something that we want to look into. But of course, it's problematic because of mesh size and so on. It's problematic with some species, and that's, I mean, clearly why we get so many or so high proportion of the bycatch that is occurring in the lumpsucker fisheries. There's also a little bit in cod, gill nets, and so on, but clearly the highest one is for lumpsucker fishery. And I mean, we know that that's probably. I mean, we when you speak to lumpsucker fishery, I mean, it's very common that people get seals in the nets. and lots of them. So.
Gisli?
I am Gisli Wikingsson from the MR. I have no voice, excuse me, from the MFRI. Yeah, I just want to add to, because Guðjón is not here, he's the one who deals with the bycatch, that he is also experimenting from year to year with the different fingers, but that's mainly on the continent, as I understand it. I don't know if he has tried it on the lumpsucker. But so far, the results are not that good when you compare nets with and without fingers. But
good for the
some places outside Iceland, they have had some reasonably good success. So it's a continuing experiment using new different kind of fingers. And the fingers are kind of, they make acoustic sound that is meant to make the seals avoid going near the nets. But also, maybe if I can add one comment, it is really amazing that these figures, how the population has gone so drastically down and then not recovered to any significant extent. So there's no reason to think that bycatch has increased from the 80s. I don't know. Is there any thought on that?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's probably from direct hunting, the initial downward trend. But
yeah, you're right. I mean, this drastic decline coincide with when the bounty system was enacted. So I think that's clearly something that affects. And then we have to remember that seals are a long-living species. They live for many years, so the recovery is going to be slow. They get one pup per year during when they are fertile. They get one pup per year, so it's something that's going to take also quite a long time. And so we didn't really record bycatch as much in the old days. That's something that we get much better at just a few years ago. So of course we don't know, but I don't think there's anything that would make us believe that the bycatch has gone up. Maybe though, population is smaller, so the proportion of the population would be higher. That would be bycatch, but there's nothing really that points towards that the bycatch has increased. I think it's more to do with that it's the renewing of the population. It's slow because it's not. Yeah, it's a long-living species that live for many years and so on. So.
Okay, you want to ask a question? Yeah, one more. I was just going to suggest that you could maybe switch the fingers with tourists. Try that.
Hi, I'm Adis. I'm working here at Hafró. I want to ask about the feeding of. So when the seals are feeding, you showed the otolith.
Yeah.
Is it possible that because the salmonid otolith is much smaller, I guess, isn't it? That you are missing them from the feces?
Yeah. So no, they're not much smaller, but they are rather fragile compared to other otoliths. On the other hand, we found lumpsucker otoliths that are tiny, and we also found lots of otoliths from herring, for example. But that's the reason we did molecular analysis as well, because we wanted to make sure that the reason that we didn't find any salmon was that the otoliths would degrade, because that's something that has been a worry. Like in the literature, people are worried about that because using otoliths has been the go-to method when it comes to seal diet for a long time. That's why we developed this pre-DNA methodology to make sure that didn't happen. And I think it's very unlikely, since we find those lumpsucker otoliths that are like 1 millimeter or something like that. And salmon otoliths are much bigger than that.
I think I give Höskuldur the last question, if that's okay.
Yeah, the first one is regarding predation on salmon. The stock size of salmon is quite low, so even though So if you could really detect it, that would mean a lot of effect. Don't really. What is the total catch of salmon in all the rivers here? That's much less than we get. That's something that we get on one boat per day in our gillnet survey. But second, are there data from Hringormanefnd how many prices or how many seals were caught and paid for? Is that so you can check if that is really the reason for the depletion in the late 80s?
Yes, I think I have that slide somewhere here in the end. No, I don't. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, there are data from that, but yeah, I don't really remember the exact number, but it's several thousand a year during that time. And actually, when it comes to salmonid and the effect, one thing that is a little bit funny is to think about that the flounder, since one of the main prey that we could show that seals are eating is flatfish, and we're not able to distinguish between the flatfishes neither with the DNA methodology or the otoliths, but flatfish is one of the I think it was sandalin and flatfish, and of course flounder we think that they could eat smolt. Is that right? And then thinking about that, I mean that's at least what many people think, right? So, and they are worried about that. So maybe if that would be true, if we could show that with research, the seals could have the opposite effect. Because if seals are eating the actual predator, so that can be discussed, but yeah.
Ok, takk fyrir Sandra.
Takk fyrir.